Here at VINwiki, we love exotic cars, especially Lamborghinis, and so I thought today it'd be fun to compile our top 10 Lamborghini-related car stories. And today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is a learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious people. I just finished Greg McKeown's class, which is based on his book Essentialism, and it was on how to accomplish more with less. As an entrepreneur, as I explored the Skillshare database of classes, I found a lot of amazing and motivating lessons that I could glean from other people who have been in similar situations or in other circumstances that I could apply to my own. Skillshare invites you to explore new skills, develop existing interests, and get lost in the creative process. If you're uncertain about what's next, creative challenges and productivity classes can be a great way to help you structure your time and set up achievable goals. At a time when so many important conversations are happening in our world, your voice is more essential than ever. Explore classes to unlock your creativity for social good. Skillshare offers membership with meaning. Connect with the support of fellow creatives and enter a community of encouragement, communication, and inspiration. Whether you're looking to fend off boredom, focus on self-care through creativity, or join a similarly creative community, Skillshare is the place to keep you learning. The first 1,000 people to visit Skillshare at the link in the description below will get a free trial of their premium membership. And after that, it's only $10 a month or so. I've definitely enjoyed thumbing through the classes that they have available, and I think I'm continuing to learn a lot. Wherever we're at in life and whatever our goals are, meeting other creative people and enjoying the benefits of a community of like-minded people is always the best way to make progress towards your goals. So we'd like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and here are our top 10 Lamborghini-related car stories.
A car like this is such a unicorn that it's hard to even put a value on it. So I am, again, constantly always searching for lost cars and treasured cars. My wife thinks I'm probably, I don't know, who knows what I'm doing in the middle of the night, but I'm on my laptop looking at registries and looking at cars that haven't been found in 20, 30 years. And there's always been a couple cars that stood out. One was the Walter Wolf Countaches. There were these very famous Countaches back in the day that were the first cars with wings and spoilers. And as a Lamborghini nut, you'd say there's, maybe 10, 20 other really iconic cars like that. So one day I'm actually on Instagram, of all places, I would search, and I still do, search cars by a hashtag. And I would look up Countach hashtag and I'd scroll through the photos and, most of the cars I knew or I knew where they were, but sometimes something would pop up interesting. Scrolling through and I see this really odd Countach in the back of a picture with its two Countaches, 25th anniversary, and this odd metallic colored Countach with white interior. What I noticed was it had these red wheels and these crazy side skirts. And I'm looking at the car and studying Countaches my entire life. It occurred to me, I think this is a special car. I look at the username of the person on Instagram, I message them, they message me back, is this your car? Where did you see it? Is it for sale? And they immediately responded saying, no, it's in storage at this storage facility. So I got the name and I called. I called the storage facility. I said, hi, how are you? I'm a Lamborghini historian and a slash collector. I didn't want to use the word dealer, but I heard you might have some interesting Countaches. Do you know if they're for sale or some information? Pleasant lady, but she was pretty short with me. She's like, no, sorry, we're storage and it's not for sale. The car's not for sale. I said, okay. Still looked at that photo. I'm trying to zoom in on Instagram. And about 2-3 hours later, I get a call from a gentleman, an incredibly nice guy. He's like, yes, there's two Countaches here. No, they're not for sale, but one of the cars is the very famous twin turbo. And I said, how do you know that? And he says, well, no, it says turbo on the side, in massive letters. And he says, you open the engine, there's these two big turbos. And he goes, no, it's from my understanding, it's a multi-million-dollar car. And so I told him, do you think the owner would sell it? And he goes, well, I know the whole history of the car. It was owned by a car collector here for many years. When he passed away, this other gentleman purchased it and he doesn't want to sell it. He actually typically keeps the cars in his living room and blah, 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 blah. And he doesn't want to sell. I said, do you mind if I come and see the car? And I imagine, so I'm calling this gentleman. He's in Reno, Nevada. I'm in Miami, Florida. So it's a little bit of a hike. But I was so intrigued that it could potentially be a Countach Turbo that I had to go and see the car. So The backstory is, in the 1980s, Lamborghini was sort of struggling in a period where they were being purchased by the Mimram brothers. And you had a lot of distributors and you had dealers and people started to do interesting things. I mean, think about it. This was a time with Roof and Gambala and Koenig and all these crazy tuners creating different projects. There was an incredible guy by the name of Max Bobnar. And Max was MB Sports Cars, which MB Sports Cars was one of the Lamborghini distributors in Europe, primarily in Switzerland. And Max actually had a big Lamborghini collection himself and was a very well-respected guy. Max started experimenting with Countach Turbos. Max actually created two cars, which were famously known as the Countach Turbo. And the two cars were even, I think if you Google them, even come up in Wikipedia pages, and they were very well known. There was posters on the cars, magazines on the cars. There were even toy models built of both cars. So there was a black car that had black wheels and like these crazy side skirts. And then personally, my favorite was a really beautiful metallic red car with white interior, racing seatbelts, and red wheels. There's actually even a famous photo of the Countach Turbo with Valentino Balboni, the famous Lamborghini test driver, Ferruccio Lamborghini, obviously the founder of Lamborghini, standing next to the Walter Wolf Countach, arguably the most famous Countach of all time, and the Countach Turbo. Iconic photo, again, only adding to the history of these Countach Turbo cars. So they were never actually built at the factory, but they were done by probably one of the most prominent distributors at the time, and sort of done in a way where Lamborghini felt it was okay. The cars were shown, they were used. He was actually selling these as a kit. Only two cars were made. And if you believe Wikipedia at the time, the red car was destroyed. And it was in numerous forums and in groups, it was actually considered as disappeared and destroyed. Jump on a flight. I think I was in Reno, Nevada, maybe 2-3 days later. I couldn't wait. I arrived to this storage facility and, upon walking in, you see GT3 RS, an old C4 Corvette, nothing too crazy, but some nice cars. I think there was a Lotus Esprit or something like that. And then in the back, there's these two Countachs. Immediately as I walked in, I could not hide my excitement. If I was there to buy the car that day, I probably had the worst poker face imaginable because I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. I realized at that moment, sitting in front of me was the lost Countach Turbo. Almost as like a little kid, I ran up to the car and I started inspecting it. And I'm looking at the tires and it's got the original Pirelli P7Rs. It has the original boost gauge from the old photos. It has the original turbos from old photos. It has the original seat belts. I mean, the car looked like someone in 1984 drove this car maybe 2,000 miles and put it away. It was so well preserved. The interior was still bright white. The dash, which was mouse hair material, was still in very nice condition. Forgetting the fact that I'm in the business of buying and selling cars for a profit, I had to buy the car. Almost to a fault, I had to buy it. And I maybe would have paid anything for the car. I ended up negotiating with the owner of this car and a sister car with it, which was a Countach 25th anniversary. It had never been titled, never registered. It was a brand new car with 400 miles. And both these cars were sitting in the gentleman's living room for many, many years. Apparently, in the 1980s, there was a very famous casino operator in Reno, Nevada. He owned a casino called Circus. And he actually used to display cars inside the casino. He had Ferraris and Lamborghinis. His favorite car, ironically, and I've been told, was the Lamborghini Countach Turbo. When he passed away, he was quite the sort of icon in the area in Reno, Nevada. Another, and I wouldn't even call him a collector, another gentleman with the means, was able to buy both Countaches, looked at the cars as art, and actually put them in his living room. Over the years, he'd have them moved to storage sometimes and then brought back to the house. But I actually negotiated with this gentleman for about a year. He was very adamant at first about not selling the cars. We went back and forth. And I knew all along that I was taking a risk. There was no way for me to really document further without going detailed into the car, without really sending everything to Lamborghini, without talking to Max Bobnar, without talking to other historians. And I didn't want anyone in the world to know that I had discovered the car. So while trying to verify what it was, I was also trying to keep things very quiet. Now, I could verify the ownership history, but I couldn't verify all the details because I didn't want people to know. So I was almost negotiating against myself because I wanted the car so badly, but I also knew as a business I had to be okay. I had to be safe. A car like this is such a unicorn that it's hard to even put a value on it. Is it worth this or is it worth this? And really the only way to tell is when you finally put it out to market sometimes. One day I get a call from the gentleman at the storage facility and he goes, I think it's time. I think he's finally ready to sell. Within about 2-3 days, I ended up getting into such a great argument with the owner that I almost wasn't even allowed to purchase the cars because he was that upset with me. I wasn't being rude, I wasn't being mean, I was just being very honest about the value of Countach's and the value of the market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So after, let's say, almost a year and a half, we ended up purchasing the cars, bringing them back to Miami. I personally think the Countach Turbo was one of the most interesting discoveries that we had ever made, not just because it was a very cool car and because it was, you know, a turbo Countach with a lot of horsepower, but because also it's an icon to Lamborghini enthusiasts. I've run into so many people since we discovered it, since we showed photos to the world, that called me and said, oh my God, I always wanted to see that car. We even had a collector out of the Northeast that called me and he said, if I didn't already have 2 Countach's, I'd have to buy this car. He flew down just to see it and then told me that he actually was going to figure out how to convince his wife to buy a 3rd Countach. The story gets even funnier because he actually brought a poster of the car that he had when he was a kid, and he told himself as a kid that he would one day own the car. Probably at some point 5-10 years ago when he started buying Countach's, he actually asked another historian to find him that exact car. The historian couldn't at the time. The car was, you know, very hidden away, and he ended up buying 2 other cars. Unfortunately, he didn't end up with the car, but just seeing the smile on his face when he saw it, that moment made the whole discovery and everything worthwhile.
I look at the cop and I'm like, what are you doing? Arrest this guy. No response whatsoever. Around 2011 and 12, we started to get a lot of demand for exotic cars from South America. And at that point, the dealer network there was kind of underdeveloped, and it was still a fairly novel concept that it was actually safe enough to drive cars that valuable in those countries, particularly Brazil, because that's where a lot of the calls were coming from. But we weren't being contacted by the end users down there. Instead, it was brokers or businesses in South Florida that were exporting the cars. And since it's against our franchise agreement to sell cars that we know are probably going to be exported, it wasn't really up to me whether or not we took these deals. So I would talk to my general manager, and at the time he was pretty open to that. He wanted to sell as many as we could, and so if that's what this meant, okay. So there was one guy in particular that we dealt with a lot, and he was very professional and easy to deal with and made expectations clear and communicated well, and he became a great client. I would sell him 5 to 10 cars a year. And in general, he would just call and say, I've got a guy that wants a Gallardo, he's open to these colors, what do you have? And he would just buy something out of our inventory. He would give us a deposit, and 2 or 3 weeks later, he'd have the rest of the money and he would send it. It can take a long time to get that amount of money out of South America, so it was nice to have this kind of buffer, not only for some plausible deniability, but to make the transactions a little bit more convenient. But about a year into the relationship, he came to me and said he had a request for 2 very specific cars. A guy wanted a yellow 2012 brand new Gallardo Performante and a 2012 Bentley Continental Flying Spur Speed. And I could find the Gallardo through another dealer, but obviously we weren't a Bentley dealer. And so I told him, let me do a day or 2 of research. I'll find us a car, figure out what discounts are available, and I'll get you one. So the next day I found a white one, exactly what he wanted with the right options at a good discount, and he was happy. But we had to kind of lay down the rules a little bit differently because we told him, look, in most cases, if your deal falls apart, we'll be happy to give you your deposit back. And we had in some cases, but in this case, we're having to secure 2 cars and buy them, let the warranties start, that we really don't want for inventory. So we need a bigger deposit, and truly in this case, it is non-refundable. And he agreed with that, but he said, look, I don't have a bunch of cash right now, but I do have an almost brand new BMW X6 that I secured for a client. He gave me a deposit and then he didn't consummate the transaction. So why don't I give you that and the title as a non-refundable deposit on these cars? So we agreed to that. It was worth about 55 grand. So we bought the other 2 cars and brought them into inventory. And a couple weeks later, kind of as you'd imagine, his deal fell apart. So we ended up owning this brand new Lamborghini and this brand new Bentley that we really didn't want. And we didn't know what it was really going to take to sell them. And they sat around for a very long time. But eventually we did sell the Bentley to some professional golfer. I don't remember who it was, not Tiger Woods. And the Gallardo just sort of sat around for a good long while. And a couple months later, my boss was like, guys, we have got to move this Gallardo. And at that time, the $200,000 or so price point that the LP 550s were at, those cars sold great, but the $280 to $300 LP 570s sat around for a good long while. And he was starting to get nervous about it, and so we were trying to call anybody, but I didn't have anybody I could just snap my fingers and sell the car to. And around that time, there was a guy who came in fairly often trying to test drive cars. And in general, we didn't test drive many cars, and certainly not new cars, and never early in the process. We would already have dealt with when you want to buy, how you want to pay, what the contingencies are, what we've got to deal with before that, because we weren't worried about you not liking the way the car drove. And if you were just trying to drive a car to see which one you'd eventually want to buy, I mean, that's what magazines are for. So we weren't doing much test driving, and certainly I wasn't, and I really didn't deal with that many people that were showroom ups that just walked in, because about 80% of my business at that point was repeat customers. But this guy had come in a few times fishing for test drives, and I just kind of deflected it, and he'd get a little bit upset, but then just sort of leave. And he was an exceedingly unpleasant person to deal with. He had said that his wife was some professional tennis player, and that he had some tech startup that he was in the process of selling to Microsoft for like $80 million, but he wouldn't tell us who she was or what the business did or what it was called or anything like that. And obviously the guy's lying, but regardless, he would just go away and it wasn't that big of a deal. But he showed up one Saturday and I was busy doing something else, so he started talking to one of my coworkers. And a little bit less gracefully than I would tend to, he refused to let this guy test drive a car. And things got a little heated, then they got more hostile, then they got a little bit combative. And they were shouting at each other, and he was screaming profanity across our showroom. And I'm over in the corner with some cappuccino and popcorn, just ready for the fireworks to start, because this coworker of mine generally kept more firearms on his person or around his desk than a Jason Bourne movie. But my general manager didn't like the circumstance, so he stepped in and tried to diffuse everything. And his solution was, let me let you talk to Ed. So he calls me over and he's like, Ed knows everything about Lamborghinis. He'll be happy to help you with whatever you want to do. I said, all right, hey, I'm Ed Bolian. How can I help you? So he said, I want to test drive that yellow Lamborghini right now. And I said, well, it's really up to him, my general manager here. If he wants you to, I'll be more than happy to pull it out. And he said, yep, whatever you want. Ed, go get the keys, get it out of here. So we began the 20 or 30 minute process of shuffling all these cars around to get this car out of the showroom, because Saturdays are the worst possible day to test drive a car at an exotic car dealership. The showrooms are full of Instagram photographers and everybody's busy doing different things, delivering cars to people coming in from out of town. So it's just a terrible time to tie up an hour or two with a particular customer, especially one that you know is not going to buy a car. So we get the car out of the showroom and we head out on the test drive. And our test drive route is actually dictated by our insurance provider, and it's designed to be an easy way to show someone a car in a very safe way. So it's mostly right turns with good visibility, no unaided lefts, and we kind of go down a state highway, and then we loop around an exit where there's a MARTA station, our local Georgia public transit, and then back up to the dealership. So it's about a 10-mile loop, and we drive the first 5 miles, just kind of showing them how all the controls work. And this was before all the accidents that would happen in the subsequent years, so our insurance company really liked us and we wanted to keep it that way. So I was behaving myself, although we didn't tend to along that route, because that state highway is technically speed patrolled by the Georgia State Patrol, not the local cops. And there's no good places for them to set up speed traps, and since it's kind of the only road like that on the north part of town, there really are never cops on this route. And that's kind of strategic on our part, because sometimes we really want to show people what the cars can do. And as we talked about in the press car video, you can go pretty fast along our test drive route. But in this case, I was behaving myself, just kind of showing him, all right, this is the car, this is the speed limit. Let's just see how things go and keep everything safe. So we get to the point where we change seats, kind of in a parking deck at this MARTA station, and he gets in the driver's seat. And I make sure his mirrors are adjusted, his steering wheel's where he wants it, everything's comfortable. And he starts driving. And this guy goes absolutely insane. I mean, immediately just full acceleration, hard braking, upsetting the balance of the car. I mean, there are elegant ways to speed, and this was not that. It was dangerous, it was entirely out of control, and I immediately said, dude, this is not how we're gonna drive. Like, you can try to experience the car and see what you like, but this is not how we're gonna behave in this car on this test drive. And he would kind of back off and then immediately just speed back up. And I'm like, sir, I got to ask you to slow down. Like, we cannot drive like this. I understand that you want to see what the car can do, but this is not how we're going to do it. And again, he kind of slowed down, but he kept just speeding up, and he's going 130, 140 miles per hour, weaving in and out of cars. And I finally say, sir, if you persist like this, I'm going to have to ask you to pull over, and we got to switch seats. And he's like, no, I'm driving the car. And then, fortunately, about a quarter mile ahead, I see a local cop driving in our same direction. And I said, sir, there's a cop. Let's just behave ourselves. We need to keep a good relationship with them. And he goes, no. Downshifting 2 gears, flooring the throttle, and accelerating as hard and fast as he can at the rear of this police car. And I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? And he slams on the brakes and comes within inches of this cop's rear bumper. I mean, just tailgating this guy. And I'm like, well, fantastic. This is going to save us all. He's going to pull him over, give him a ticket for following too close, and I'll get to drive back to the dealership. No, the cop doesn't even notice. He goes, watch this. And I go, no, please don't. And he downshifts again, floors the car, barely avoids knocking the cop's mirror off, and flies away from him well over 100 miles an hour. And of course, we got the top down on this Performante convertible. I look at the cop and I'm like, what are you doing? Arrest this guy. No response whatsoever. So as he's accelerating away from this completely non-responsive cop, he looks over at me and says, I am invincible. And I said, well, I'm not. And I'm like, this is how I'm going to die. I don't know what witchcraft this guy is capable of, and I don't know what's happening in my life at all right now, but I know we have a cloverleaf exit coming up in half a mile, and this guy doesn't have any clue how to drive a car, so we're going to flip over and die right about now. And magically we didn't. The cop never responded in any way, but we made it around that turn, and I said, sir, we're almost back. Please just drive carefully. And somehow we managed to get back with the car in one piece and us all still alive. And I have no idea how that happened. But of course, as you would imagine, he immediately said, well, let me continue to think about it and I'll call you if I decide this is what I want to buy. And he immediately departed without saying anything to anybody else at the dealership. And I walked back in, and of course their first question is, well, is he going to buy it? I said, you guys got to be kidding me.
Kimmy, do you have butt implants?
Kimmy, do you have butt implants?
Kimmy?
Do you have butt implants?
Kimmy, do you have...
Butt implants?
And I said to her, Kimmy, do you have butt implants?
Last week was my 100th car story here on the channel, and I've got plenty more to tell, but I was asking a few friends, like, what should I do to kind of commemorate that body of work or whatever it means? And the overwhelming consensus was to retell the Prostitute Lamborghini story. So without any further ado, early in 2011, I was working as the director of sales at Lamborghini Atlanta, and we had a flatbed come in, and on the back of it, there was a 2004 blue Chelum Lamborghini Gallardo. And these two guys got out. They didn't really speak much English, but as best we could understand it, they wanted us to tell them what it would take to get the car running. And it was as rough as a car that still in one piece could be. The tires were bald, the wheels were curved, every panel had some ding, dent, scratch, whatever. The taillights were broken, the door handle was broken off, and it obviously didn't start or run. And so we get it off and put it around back, and a couple days later we get it checked out. So we put it in the shop, and we could tell that it needed a clutch and a throwout bearing and a rear main seal and all the obvious wear and tear items. So it was a good 20 to 25 grand worth of stuff. And so we put it out back after diagnosing it, and we called the number that these two guys had left, but of course there's no answer. And so we try every morning but don't get anywhere. But a couple days later, this guy walks in and he says, hey, do y'all have a blue Lamborghini here for service? And we said, yes. Do you know anything at all about it? Can you tell us, do you want us to fix it? Is it yours? And he says, no, it's not mine. He said, it belongs to my girlfriend's daughter, and she's very attractive. And I said, well, thank you. That won't impact our level of service, sir, but it's always nice to know the information in the periphery. You know, can we talk to her or something like that? He said, no, she's not available right now, but let me see if I can get in touch with her mom, and we'll see what we can do. And I said, okay, great. So the next couple days, we keep trying the number, no answer, but then the mom shows up. And she says, yeah, it belongs to my daughter. I don't think she's going to be able to pay to fix it, and she is in jail right now. She says she got arrested for going 180 miles per hour in this car. I was like, okay, well, can we get in touch with her? Is she going to get out? She's like, yeah, she should be out pretty quick. I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make a ton of sense. But she said she'll probably want you to buy the car because I don't think she's going to fix it. We said, well, we can do that. That's what I told her. And she leaves. And we continue trying to get in touch. No response from anything. Even the numbers they had left, the boyfriend, the mom, nobody. So a couple days after that, Kimmy shows up. And Kimmy is a prostitute. And it might be politically correct to say she's allegedly a prostitute, but that would be a disservice to the 3 metro Atlanta municipalities that had convicted her of such things in the prior years. So she shows up, and as best I could understand it, Kimmy was half black and half Vietnamese. And certain parts of her appeared to be rather augmented. You might say that she had some aftermarket parts. And she was a very charming girl, probably one of the most interesting people I've ever come to know. But I suppose what Kimmy would say is her most marketable feature is her backside. I actually saw on one of her now banned social media profiles that Kimmy has 50-inch hips. So the girl could take a break while hula hooping. And so she shows up and she's telling us a little bit about her car, and she'd bought it about a year prior to that at Lamborghini Miami, paying all cash. And it had actually been about 9 months, and during that time, apparently somebody had bumped into it in a Wendy's drive-thru. Her mother was correct. She couldn't afford to fix the car. And so she asked us if we would buy it. And I had already talked to my general manager, and he had pretty much said, look, we don't want the thing for inventory. And he wasn't really comfortable representing it to other wholesalers because he didn't really know what the car was going to need beyond what we could immediately diagnose. Because once you put the clutch and everything else in it, then you could figure out if it needs a $17,000 shift actuator or an $8,000 front diff or all the other things that are kind of the time bomb problems on early Gallardos. Also, you never know if it's been run low on oil. It was a pretty low VIN. So there were a lot of kind of monsters in the closet. And so I had asked him, you know, look, if you don't want it, can I try to buy it? Because about 1.5 years prior to that, my wife and I had bought one of T-Pain's Rappers 360s. It was in a similar circumstance. It needed about 10 grand worth of junk to be fixed enough to then drive, and we hoped nothing else happened, and it hadn't. So we had made some good money on that. I figured, hey, this might be a good way for lightning to strike twice. And so I was talking to Kimmy, and I said, all right, yeah, we can buy it, but actually it's going to be probably me buying it because honestly, there's nobody else bidding. And I asked her kind of, what does she want? And so her thinking she'd paid 100 grand for this car and it needs 20, 25 grand worth of work, she's like, well, I want $75,000. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but there's all these things that it could still need. It's not worth that, but I will give you $30,000 for the car. And I knew I wasn't really bidding against anybody, but of course, Kimmy was a very shrewd negotiator, so we met right smack dab in the middle at 30,000 bucks. So she comes over to my desk and we're kind of getting everything sorted out, but she says, you know, I'm gonna need another car. I said, okay, what would you like? She said, I'd really like a pink Bentley like the one Paris Hilton has. I said, well, they didn't make an awful lot of pink Bentleys, but we could probably buy you a Continental GT, not for 30 grand, but maybe for 50, and for 10 grand we paint or wrap it pink. You know, it's possible. And if we've got 30,000 as a down payment, we could probably get you a loan for the other half. That's fairly reasonable. Would you like to try to get a loan? She says, yes. So that meant that we got to talk about Kimmy's credit. And fortunately, she had her Social Security card with her at all times. She pulls it out, I write all the information down, get her driver's license, and we get to talk about where she works. She gives me the name of some pornography company, and I noticed her address was kind of at a peculiar place in town, and I Googled it, and it was actually a local spa, and I confirmed that with her. She said, yes, that's my official address. And then we got to talk about her income, and I said, how much do you make? And she kind of shook her head, and I was like, well, is that because you don't file a tax return or you don't report it all? And she said, I don't do any of that stuff. I said, well, okay. And so she kind of estimated, and she said, it really varies. I said, oh, I'm sure it does. And we came up with a number that was kind of very fair to justify the loan that she would need. And I took everything into my finance guy's office, and he immediately entered it in and then just threw it back at me, said, you got it wrong. I said, no, I'm quite sure I didn't. He said, well, if that's the case, then this girl doesn't have a credit score, has never had a library card, a cell phone in her name, a bill, anything. No one has ever trusted her to repay them $1. And we didn't have any banks that were going to become the first to do so. So I had to go back with the bad news to Kimmy and say, I'm sorry, but we do not have a way to get you a loan for your Bentley. So you and Paris Hilton will not be moving along the road in the same way tomorrow. But she was a little bit disappointed, but just said, okay, you can just pay me for the Lamborghini. So I went back to my accounting controller's office and got a check cut for $30,000 for the car. And I handed it to her. And as a, generally a glorified used car salesman, I got looked at as though I was being dishonest to people fairly often, even if it weren't the case. But in that case, she looked at me with such a lack of trust. I've never seen it in another human. And I hand her this check and she says, "What am I supposed to do with that?" And I said, "Well, it's a check. You could deposit it into your bank account, or you could take it to our bank and they'll give you money." And she had never held a check in her life. The girl's in her early 20s. And I said, "Well, I promise you it's light money." She said, "Well, could you just give me money?" And she said, "Well, we don't have that much cash." So she took it extremely reluctantly and went on her way. So I spent the next few weeks fixing up the car. We got it running, and I drove it for about a year, almost daily. In fact, I ended up selling a Mercedes that I had been daily driving. I was just very pleased to have this, low budget Lamborghini Gallardo that I could drive as much as I wanted. Had a ton of fun, took it on some great road trips, took it to shows, just had a blast. I loved the car. But the problem was, Kimmy had told me during this negotiation that she had a second key for it. And obviously it wasn't with it when it was towed in. And not to judge, but I wasn't entirely comfortable with someone in her profession having a second key to my car. And so I kept kind of pinging her, calling her, texting her, asking her, like, "Can you bring me that second key?" And I wasn't getting any response. A few months later, kind of just out of the blue, I got a text from her and it said, "Tomorrow's my birthday. Do you still want that second key?" I said, "Well, I don't understand what those two things could have to do with each other, but yes, I do still want the second key." And the immediate text that was queued up was, "Can I get $100 for it?" And I said, "Well, I'm the only person that has any legal right to this key, but yes, you can extort another $100 from me. I'll be happy to pay you that. But you have to have it here by 5 p.m. today, because I didn't want this just hanging out there. If I'm going to pay for it, then bring it on." So, of course, 5 o'clock comes and goes, and I don't see Kimmy. The next day, we closed at about 7 o'clock. At about 6:50, Kimmy comes in. And the best way for me to describe what Kimmy was wearing is that it was a basketball net. It was literally more holes than white fabric. Nothing at all left up to the imagination. So she walks in out of a rainy day, and there's a woman with a young child at our parts counter buying something, I don't know. She drops whatever she had on the counter, grabs her child, and runs out of the building screaming after seeing what Kimmy was wearing. Kimmy was kind of oblivious to this, and she comes over, and I said, "Kimmy, what are you all dressed up for?" And she said, "It's my birthday." And I said, "Well, you're halfway to that outfit," but I don't think she understood what I meant. And she comes up and gives me a great big hug. Kimmy loves to hug. And we sit down at my desk. She's got the key. Of course, the battery's dead. I try to open it from my desk. I have to walk out and make sure it works. I come back. It works. I give Kimmy her $100. And, given her attire and kind of the extent of our relationship at that point, I've kind of felt like certain questions were not necessarily off limits. And so I said to Kimmy, "Kimmy, do you have butt implants?" And she was excited, really proud to answer. I guess she'd put a lot of energy or money or whatever into the achievement there. And she said, "No, I don't. I had a fat redistribution." I said, "Kimmy, would you tell me more about that?" She said, "Yes." She said, "They made me gain 30 pounds. And then they liposuctioned it all out here. And then they injected it right here." She pointed to the scar. There wasn't obviously anything covering it. And they must have used something between like a turkey baster and a jackhammer to insert it back in there. And I said, "Well, Kimmy, does it feel peculiar? Is it strange?" She said, No, it's just there. Like when you sit on it. She said, "No, it's just part of me now." And I said, "Well, that is absolutely fascinating." And so Kimmy went on to celebrate her birthday in whatever way she saw fit, and I went on to drive my Gallardo. Obviously, we had thoroughly disinfected it. There was a lot of glitter to vacuum up and some exotic smells to mitigate. And of course, after that, Kimmy followed me on many social media platforms, and she was banned from a lot of them, but she was able to comment on my Instagram. And she was particularly fond of pictures of my large albino snake for some reason. And my wife would notice these things and say, "Who's this Kimmy girl?" And I was like, don't click on the profile, and just don't worry about her, but she is where the Lamborghini came from. And as we released the first copy of this story about a year and a half ago, and a popular request is, can we have Kimmy on here to tell her side of the story? And unfortunately, she is indisposed on another period of confinement for professional reasons for the next 10 to 20 years, so we can't have that happen. But she's a very fascinating girl, and I wish her all the best. And I was very pleased to have met the recipient of such a pioneering medical procedure.
This is the Columbus Police Department. We're about to tow your Lamborghini. So not only have I had a string of run-ins with the cops, I've also had a few close encounters and not so close encounters with getting some pretty fantastic cars towed. One of the first ones was a 1973 Porsche 911S. And I had been storing this car for a customer, and he asked me to come meet him for lunch and to bring the car. And he said, you know, it needs some exercise, you know, go for it. He said, oh, you know, check the plate, you know, I make sure it's registered before you leave. And I looked at the date and I said 5/13. I said, okay, it's April's 4, we're good. And I thought to take a dealer tag with me, but just didn't. So I'm driving, I'm on my way there. A cop starts following me. And he pulls me over. I'm like, okay, you know your registration's expired. I'm like, no, it isn't. Because yeah, it expired in May of last year. Oh, it's 2014. Sorry about that. He goes, well, do you have your license and insurance card? I'm like, I couldn't find the guy's insurance card because again, it had been in storage with me forever. So he comes back what seemed like a half an hour later, and he goes, well, we got another problem. This plate is not for this car. This is registered to a 2011 Mercedes. I said, I guess there's no way I can convince you that this is a 2011 Mercedes, huh? He said, hey, I'm not going to arrest you, but I have to tow your car. There's nothing I can do about that. All the time I'm on the phone with my customer, I said, you know, we're not going to make lunch because you put the wrong plate on your car. Thanks for that, by the way. Another time, I was up in Elkhart Lake for the Road America Vintage Races. And I was staying with a friend, and on, I think, Saturday night, they have a car show, which is all the local cars, vintage cars, whatever that people have, and they shut down downtown and line the streets with these cars. They had asked him to bring his Viper ACR-X to the show. And an ACR-X, as you know, is a race version of the Viper ACR, no VIN, not street legal. But in Elkhart Lake, during vintage weekend, you know, pretty much anything goes. So all the race cars from the track get a police escort, they come down and fill up the streets. So I didn't see any issue with driving a race car 3/4 of a mile down to the show. And he asked me to take it for him because they had already started barbecuing and were a few beers deep, and I hadn't had anything to drink. So he goes, hey, you want to take the car down to the show? Because I told him I'd take it. I'm like, yeah, no problem. Me and a friend hop in the car and go down to the show. And after like an hour, I look at her, I'm like, I really want steak. You want to go back to the party? The show is boring. Yeah, let's do that. So I hop in the car. May or may not have done a nice burnout, you know, between the rows of cars. And this young whippersnapper cop on a bicycle, pedal bicycle, pulls up next to me. And I'm thinking, oh, that's nice. He's going to stop traffic for me and allow me to get out, because that's the kinds of things that happen on Road America Vintage Weekend. No. Sir, is this car registered? Very simple question. Yes, was my answer. Yes. He goes, where's your plate? And here again, I'm thinking, I had a dealer plate with me. It would have been as simple as slapping it on the windshield and no questions would have been asked. So he goes, pull around the corner and I'm gonna check your paperwork. I just look at my passenger, I'm like, we're screwed. And I hear his radio go off and he gets all flustered and he's just like, I gotta go to this call. You just go straight home. I was certainly relieved not to have to call him and say his ACR-X had been impounded. Another time I was driving a 89 Countach anniversary down to Columbus for this exotic car rally where they shut down the roads and had a big police escort, an overnight thing. It was actually quite comfortable driving on the highway. Obviously terrible trying to maneuver it around with an 800-pound clutch that I think Jay Cutler would have a hard time pushing in and out. I notice my voltmeter is starting to creep down. And, you know, I've been watching my gauges religiously because that's what you do with a Lamborghini. Even though I know what's wrong, I call my Italian tech and I say, hey, this is happening, what's wrong? And he goes, oh, your alternator's going bad. I'm like, okay, thanks, I knew that, but, you know, nothing I can really do. Can't turn off the air conditioning because it's probably off anyway. Even if it was on, I wouldn't be able to tell in that car. So we make it to the finish party. So I let the cops know that, hey, I have to leave this car here. It's stranded. No problem. We'll let the next shift know. You know, we'll take care of it. So the next day I said, okay. I called a friend. I said, hey, can you pick me up and can I borrow a car to go back to Cleveland? I'll get my enclosed trailer. I'll trailer your car back and then go get the Lamborghini. So he picks me up at my hotel. We're on our way back to his house. And I get a phone call from a 614 number. I'm like, I should probably pick this up. Mr. Tabbitt, this is the Columbus Police Department. We're about to tow your Lamborghini. Apparently, the meters run on Saturdays, and the cop from last night had not let anyone else know that this was the situation, so I had accumulated some parking tickets on the car. But thankfully, the cop didn't want the liability of towing the Lamborghini, so she looked up my dealer plate and found my number and called me and said, listen, you need to come get the car. If we get a complaint call, we have to tow it. I'm like, okay, well, I'll be there as quickly as I can. Please don't tow it. Thank you very, very much. So I called Craig Reed over at Studio 47, and he was loading up, getting ready to go away for a race weekend. And he said, no problem. Come on over. I've got my trailer hooked up. We'll go get it now. So we put the booster box on, starts right up fine. And I noticed the voltmeter's back up to 14. I'm like, that's kind of weird. So I said, you know, I'm just going to try driving it back and see what happens and just follow me in case. It ended up making it back to the shop with no alternator issues. Turns out it was something that happens when they get hot. So he did end up rebuilding the alternator, but thanks to Craig, I did not get the Lamborghini towed and impounded, which would have stunk because it was a super low mile anniversary Countach. Some friends of mine and I decided to go down and stay at the Hilton where the Gold Rush Rally was staying when they came through Cleveland. And we happened to follow a McLaren in that was probably the first person in from the rally. And so we pull up to the valet. I said, we're not on the rally or anything, we're just staying here for the night. He said, okay, we'll just follow that McLaren, they'll tell you where to go. Watched all the cars come flying in, took pictures, this and that, then got a cab and went out on the town. We get back and I said, hey, let's go down into the parking garage and see all the cars that might have showed up after we left. So we wander down into the parking garage and the security guard goes, hey, you can't come in here, you don't have a wristband. I said, well, those are our cars right there. So he goes, oh, yeah, we've been looking for you. You're not part of the rally. You came under here under false pretenses and you pretended you were part of the rally and you're not supposed to be parked over here with these cars and you need to move it or we're gonna tow you. The people I was with were a little more hot-headed than I am and they had a little alcohol to fuel that as well. So they started arguing with this guy. I was the only one reasonably sober or within spitting distance of being sober. So I pulled my friends aside and I'm just like, guys, just hold on, calm down, just give me a minute. So I went to security guard and I said, listen, I know you're trying to do your job. We're guests of the hotel. I asked the valet where to park and he told us. We don't have stickers on our car, you can see that. But I said, none of us is in any position to move these cars. We've all been drinking, we're not moving the cars. I said, but it's not a great idea to tow us either because we're guests of the hotel. In the back of my mind, I wanted to be like, do you like your job? Because if you do, you're not going to tow a couple Ferraris and a Porsche that are parked here that are guests of the hotel. You will not have a job in the morning. But I didn't say that. I was trying to appeal to his sense of power and his ego and all that. So he said, okay, all right, I'll let it slide, but I can't speak for the guy that comes in at 7 in the morning. And I'm like, I can. He's not really going to care. I guarantee you, he's just going to be like, whoa, look at these cars, So it ended up, everything was fine. And, we came down in the morning, our cars were still there. A potentially really bad situation was diffused thanks to clearer heads prevailing.
It's sort of like having James Bond dog sit for you or having Kimmy do your taxes. I'll never forget the first magazine article I read about the Murcielago. It was in 2001, and it was a road and track article where they had taken a press car to Nardo racetrack, and they had broken the fastest 100 miles, fastest 100 kilometers, and the furthest distance driven in a car in an hour. And I just fell in love with the car. I thought it was so dramatic, and it took everything that was awesome about a Countach and a Diablo, and it brought it into enough of a modern context that it was something that could be driven, but not so far into it that it had so much crazy technology that it wouldn't be reliable years from then. And I felt like I had to drive one, and I was 16, 17 years old at the time, and I had the habit of sort of talking car dealers into letting me test drive cars, but I couldn't get the local Atlanta dealer to let me test drive one, the dealership that I would end up working at not too long afterwards. But I ended up calling Lamborghini Carolinas, and I explained to them my business at the time, and I had started an exotic animal breeding practice. I had an albino iguana business out of my parents' basement, and it was not that profitable, but it was able to sort of weave the illusion together that I might be much wealthier than a 17-year-old ought to be. And so I convinced them that if I would come up there, that they would let me test drive one of their new cars. And so we took this gorgeous red example around and drove it all over the back roads around the dealership. And I remember the only time the salesperson told me to slow down, I think we were doing about 110 through a school zone. Now the school zone was closed, but they had a terrific relationship with the local law enforcement. In fact, the only other person I saw in the dealership that day was the local chief of police that was getting to drive whatever he wanted in whatever manner he might choose. And I, was in no position at that point to afford one, but I kind of, filed that in the back pocket and set out in my life to find a way to have the means to do so. And I started the exotic car rental company, and it wasn't really the right car for that type of fleet. And I ended up, proceeding on to work at the dealership. And not long after that, we got in an orange manual LP640. So the second generation of the Murcielago. And that was really what I wanted. It was so timeless, had the gated shifter and everything that you could love about a big dramatic sports car. And I knew long term that it would be much more reliable than the paddles, because we were already starting to see, the occasional shift actuator failure or excessive early clutch wear that you might find with an e-gear car. So I really wanted to stick. But the rule of thumb with the manufacturers had always been that about 5% of new sports cars, particularly from the Italian manufacturers, were demanded as manual transmissions. So it wasn't the lion's share of the market. It wasn't something you saw all that often. So I kind of started casually making a list of the VINs of the cars that I would see. And as I was adding them up and calling people and sort of searching classifieds and databases, I only wound up finding 26 cars. And as I was doing that, I started to develop these relationships, both with the owners, but also with the people who wanted to buy them. And they were starting to recognize, particularly around early 2014, that these cars were a lot more rare than people gave them credit for. I got a call from a friend of a friend, and that mutual friend we had a manual LP640. He said, I know Ed's looking for these cars, kind of keeping tabs on them. Why don't you call him and he'll find you one to buy? Because this guy had decided this was his dream car, and he wanted to pay really whatever it took to get a nice one at that point. And this was right after Nicolas Cage's old car, a balloon white car that I had sold about 2011, had sold again for $329,000. So it was kind of a new market setting price, but people weren't sure if they should attribute it to his celebrity status or the fact that the car was so rare. And early in 2014 at the Amelia Island RM auction, someone had paid way more than anyone imagined was possible for a manual $599, and the reason they did so is because the ad had stated that there were only 19 ever brought to the US. Now in fact there were about 30 that we've got on VINwiki now, but they're plenty rare, much more rare than any of the modern cars that we're told are rare, 599 GTOs, 16Ms, Porsche 911Rs that are built in much larger quantities than anything that was rare historically. And so as I was building my list, I ended up being able to source another car because I called everybody I knew that had them, and I said, look, I've got someone who's interested in paying up for one. And I ended up selling an 07 orange car to him for about $281,000. And that was a very strong number for the time, but definitely evidence of where the market was headed. But there weren't a ton of people out there at that point recognizing them. Now at that point, I'd owned two LP640s myself. I bought an orange Roadster in 2012 and a red coupe in 2014. And so I was looking to trade into a manual car and was just kind of surveying the market that I could find. And I ended up finding a green 08 that was like the nicest example of a coupe that I could find. And I got it for $215,000. I had sold it a year or so prior for not much more than that, but it was at a moment when I couldn't buy it myself. And so I was very pleased to get the car back from the guy, and he was ready to move it. So I had my one of these 26 cars that I could identify as the LP640 coupes and roadsters for the US market. And I'd also seen how many of them had been damaged or hurt in some way, and that the number was fast dwindling each year. So I called the factory to kind of verify my findings. And I said, hey, do you know how many LP640s with a stick you brought into the US? And they said, no, we have no idea. We don't keep records like that. What are you talking about? I said, well, if you go into your sales system and you type this VIN prefix, you'll be able to tell me how many VINs it puts out, and that'll be how many are in the US. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess that would work. And they're like, so what's the VIN prefix? I said, well, ZHWBU37M for the coupe and ZHWBU47M for the roadster. According to their records, there were 23 in the US, and I had already found more, but the factory has kind of a way of disavowing any knowledge of cars with a sordid past or anything like that. It was just the perfect driving experience for a hypercar, supercar that you could actually use. And as I've talked about, it really is an utterly useless car. You know, it doesn't fit anywhere, you can't see anything behind you. It's sort of like having James Bond dog sit for you, or having Kimmy do your taxes. That's really not what they're for, but it would be wildly entertaining to watch them try. And so if I take this car to the grocery store or out in some crowded parking lot, it's stupid, it's worthless, and it doesn't work in that context, but it makes every driving experience an awful lot of fun. And so I loved the green car, but it was appreciating so fast because I was spreading the word of how rare these cars were, even to the point that RM referenced in selling another car my website to say how rare they were. And it was working, and the values were skyrocketing, and every month or two there was a new precedent transaction of how expensive the cars were and how valuable they were. And it was legitimate because people were finding that these are so much more rare than anything else they might look at in terms of an investment exotic, that they made a ton of sense to own. But there was something about having owned the perfect one that was kind of a good and bad for me, because I want to be able to drive the car all the time. And as I have this perfect example of exactly the right spec, and it was the only green 640 coupe stick in the US, I got kind of worried about putting so many miles on it. So I drove it about 4,200 miles in a year, and I ended up selling it to Roy Katz at Katz Exotics. And I sold it to him for 350 grand, and he ended up selling it, I think, for 365. The reason I let it go is that I'd been contacted by the owner of another one. And I said, you know, look, I have to have one of these cars. I would just rather have one that's not as nice. You know, it's sort of like the end of Gone in 60 Seconds, where Nicolas Cage has just had this profound experience with his dream car, the 67 Shelby GT500. And he ends up obviously doing away with this perfect example. And at the close of the movie, Angelina Jolie's character gives him a really rough example that's kind of a project of his dream car. And so I found this guy, and he had one with a bit of a story. But he'd owned the car for a little while and spent a bit on maintenance, but he said, you know, it needed a few things. He was not very good at describing the condition of the car or the car's history. And so that didn't make him much of a shrewd negotiator, as you might imagine. The car had a previous salvage or theft recovery title while it was in Canada. And it had been sold new in Canada, but then it was listed for sale around 2009. And the dealer that was representing the car had taken it out joyriding one night, drunk. What I came to understand is he had sort of spun it around and ended up on a curb, and he had broken the front wheel and broken the rear control arm. And so the car wasn't drivable, but he was trashed. And he didn't want to wait around for the cops to get a DUI, so rather than doing that, he took his dealer tag off and got a taxi home and reported the car stolen when he got into work the next morning. And so his insurance paid out for the theft, and I don't know whatever happened to him in terms of that fraud, but the car was issued a branded title in Canada. But for some reason, when it came into the US around 2013, the brand washed off. Now that doesn't tend to happen, so I'm not exactly sure how they did, but now, as I've got it in Georgia, it's got a clean Georgia title. It had a clean Florida title in Nevada when I bought it. As I placed my green car with Roy Katz, and I had made about $135,000 owning it in about a year, and fortunately, since I had financed all of it with Woodside Credit, I'd done so with really no money out of pocket. So this was all profit and all cash that I could use to buy the next car. And he had wanted 150 grand for this car in its, current form, and it had some needs. And so it seemed like the perfect thing. It was my dream car that I could spend some time fixing up, but at the very least I could drive guiltlessly as many miles as I'd ever want to. Well, I agreed to buy it for 130 to 140 grand, but I'm like, we'll finalize the exact number when I get out there. And so I flew out to Vegas with a friend. It's a little worse than he's described. And I'm kind of pot committed because I've got 2 guys in a one-way ticket in Vegas, and I was planning to drive the car home. But the air conditioning didn't work, the check engine light was on, the airbag light was on, the seatbelt alarm was dinging constantly. It was miserably out of alignment. There were a few little cracks in the leading edges, the rockers and the bumper that he hadn't disclosed, and it was just filthy. So we take it to a car wash to really discern exactly the state of things, and I end up having to obviously talk him down a bit on it, and I ended up buying the car for 120 grand. So I've made 135 on the green car, and I buy the gray one for 120. So this is my dream Lamborghini that I'm able to get for free just by curating the history of all these cars, because there were the 26 US cars, and this was one of 5 Canadian cars. It was also one in Mexico. But I've now got one, and this is the first Lamborghini that I've ever been able to own without a gigantic loan on it, and I'm just on cloud 9. I take it to Lamborghini Las Vegas, we get the seatbelt dinging to stop, get the air conditioning recharged, which becomes generally sufficient for the drive home, and we get it aligned so it'll at least go straight. And so we finally get the car home. It's about 2,300 miles from Vegas to Atlanta, and we just have a blast, get to see the country and really experience it in a different way than we had on the Cannonball record runs. But it was not perfect, it had blemishes everywhere, but it was perfect for me because it was just a great driver car. The same way that the Prostitute Gallardo was one that you could just own and drive guiltlessly, that was this in the context of my dream manual LP640. And so over the next few months, I got everything cleaned up and made it just a great driver example. I've had it about a year now, and I've driven it about 9,000 miles on it. But I just love it. At the moment, the CL's down for suspension issues, the 2904 S-Class is down. I just sold the limo. So it's the only registered car I have that runs. So I've been daily driving it for a couple of months now and loving every second of it. I mean, certainly it's a caricature of what a car ought to be or do, but I just love it. And as much as I have that car guy itch to trade for something new every day of my life, I just can't find something that I think I'm going to enjoy more, particularly when you couple it with the fact that the car's paid for, it's not depreciating, it's actually appreciating. I think today the cheapest one that's on the market is $309, and certainly it's a nicer car than mine, but I love having the worst example of the coolest car I could ever want. And so I'm having a blast and daily driving my dream car and not worrying about a thing.
In 2011, I bought Bitcoin at $2.52. And so technically, this Lamborghini only cost me about $115 back in 2011. As a startup entrepreneur, I've created many different types of startups. I've invested in many types of different ideas, technologies, companies, and not all of them have worked out. However, there's been one investment that has worked significantly well, and that has been Bitcoin. I first invested in Bitcoin in November of 2011, and what this really was is just a lucky investment. I read an Ars Technica article in October of 2011, and that really got my interest into this new and nascent technology. And so being a noob, I did a little bit of research. It took me about a month to research it. And in November of 2011, I bought my first Bitcoin at $2.52. So for those that don't know, Bitcoin is a radically different monetary system. It's just like the pound or the yen. It's an investment that you can make. Now, like other traditional investments like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, this one has high risk and high reward. And so as an entrepreneur, that's basically my game. I love getting into new, nascent, bleeding edge technology, and Bitcoin is certainly one of those. What makes me so excited about Bitcoin is the proliferation of all these different cryptocurrencies that have come out after 2009 when Bitcoin came out. And what we have now is a plethora, a huge opportunity to invest in a multiplicity of different coins with potential high returns with also high risk as well. I had no confidence that Bitcoin was gonna make a ton of money for me back in 2011. No idea. It was a risky proposition, and I invested more probably than I should have at the time. And from that day, I've been holding it until today. Now, I wasn't really involved with Bitcoin from about 2011 to about 2014. I really kind of forgot about it until I found out the price of Bitcoin had reached about $200 to $250. That's when I really woke up. And I found that this was a technology not only as a great investment, but as a great technology for the future. It really is the future of money. And so this has been my most successful investment over the last 6 years or so. And one of my dreams has always been to buy a Lamborghini with Bitcoin. Now, the memes and the trolls and the people online will always tell you to never buy a Lambo with Bitcoin, because as Bitcoin continues to rise in price, then it's going to end up being a $20 million Lamborghini. But sometimes you just have to reward yourself. Now, I did a video previously about how my wife did not want me to buy a Lamborghini. She thought it was too pretentious. She thought it was too ostentatious. She thought it was too, can I say rapper? It was too like gangster rap of sorts for me. And so I ended up buying an Audi R8 and ended up putting about as much money into it as I could have just bought a Lamborghini outright. However, when I was over at the VINwiki office, my colleague of mine, Ed Bolian, had his green Murcielago here, and my son was with me. And when my son got into his car, my wife was here as well. When my son got into the car, my wife's heart was changed. She looked at that and it changed her life. And I remember asking her later, I said, so why are you allowing me to buy a Lamborghini with Bitcoin? And she said, well, the reason is because I saw my son in Ed's Murcielago. And I was like, well, what does that mean? So she's like, well, he looked really good sitting in Ed's car, and I would really love to see my son drive a Lamborghini in the future, which obviously didn't include me, but I guess I need to be the purchaser of this car so that my son can drive this in the future. Bitcoin in the last couple months has reached $4,000 and close to $5,000 a coin, and I thought that this would be the best time to just slam it down, be a world first. From what I understand, no one in the world has ever bought a Lamborghini with Bitcoin before. After seeing this car on DuPont Registry, I was so excited. This was the car that I needed to buy with Bitcoin. So I had my heart set on it, went through the entire process of going back and forth with the dealership, and we finally came to a satisfactory deal. So we got to see the entire life cycle of me selling the Bitcoin or transferring the Bitcoin, going to the dealership in the Audi R8, dropping off, signing the papers, and getting into my Bitcoin Lamborghini, which is now technically the new name of this car, which is the Bitcoin Lamborghini. And so super excited about it. I'm sure you guys are going to see pictures of it somewhere around here. But yes, this is a world first. Super excited to unveil to the world the Bitcoin Lamborghini. And mostly, I want to use the Bitcoin Lambo as a mechanism for having great conversations with people and help educate them about the power and potential of Bitcoin. So I want to drive it everywhere. I would love everyone to see this awesome machine, not only the awesomeness of this machine, but I would love to have conversations with people around Bitcoin and blockchain technology and how it can change their lives as well. In 2011, I bought Bitcoin at $2.52. And so technically, this Lamborghini only cost me about $115 back in 2011. Now, Bitcoin has grown from $2.52 to now over $4,000, and that's where I've been able to profit. And so this Bitcoin Lamborghini has been completely paid for by profits from my original investment in 2011.
Will you bring the Lamborghini and just come pick me up around the corner at the Waffle House? So about 4 years ago, I got a call from a few guys in Tennessee who had gathered up some seed capital from some family members, and they wanted to start an exotic car rental company. And I get a lot of calls like this, and I've helped a few companies kind of in a consulting capacity kind of get their feet under them, help with the first few problems that you have to solve, and just kind of hit the ground running with these types of businesses. They did a good job. I sold them 5 or 6 cars that they could use that were kind of the right cars with some miles or some stories that were the right things to put more miles on and add more stories to. And it did okay, but like most exotic car rental companies, they started to run into some issues, some car crashes, some accidents, some difficult customers and things like that. And so eventually their investors decided, look, I'd kind of like whatever money is still out there to come back. And so they liquidated the cars, but they wanted to stay in the business. And what they told me they wanted to do was to start renting out other people's cars. And anytime you're in the exotic car rental business, I mean, I know every day, literally, I would get a call from an exotic car owner thinking they were doing me the biggest favor in the world by offering to let me rent their cars out as part of my fleet. But there are really 3 problems with this idea. The first is that there's really not enough money to go around. We talked about how the rental rates that you can charge today are so far less on a percentage basis of the value of the car that there's no money to be made in the industry anymore. And Turo's done this, and people who have done this type of thing have just driven the prices down, and it's just a very, very hard way to earn a living. So even if you can convince an owner to take too little for the time and the miles you're going to use your car, there's just not enough money to go around. The second issue is that in the event that a car gets totaled, the renter's insurance is going to pay out what the car is actually worth, not what the guy owes. And generally, the people that ask you to rent their cars out have huge loans against these cars that have faced some depreciation, and they're just trying to keep afloat and make their payments. And so they'd have to write a check to make up their negative equity in the event that the car gets totaled. But both of those issues pale in comparison to the third issue, and that is theft by the renter. Like we learned about with Lucky and the 612 and the Gallardo, when you rent a car and you do something other than just go drive it around, that is considered theft by conversion. And in the scenario where someone else owns the car and you act as an intermediary to rent it to a customer, you don't carry insurance on that car. It would just be too expensive and the policies just don't exist. The owner's policy won't cover it because it's a commercial activity, and the renter's policy won't cover it because that would be like me calling my insurance and saying that I stole my own car. That's not a real thing. So a few weeks ago, this company who was renting out other people's cars had an Audi R8 go missing. And it went from Tennessee, they brought it to Atlanta, and they told me where the tracking device had stopped working, and the car was nowhere to be found. The customer wasn't answering his phone, the credit cards had been canceled, everything was going poorly. And they were going through the steps with the owner of trying to figure out how they're going to recover it, if it can be recovered, offering rewards around and things like that, but the car hadn't turned up. So last week on the 4th of July, I got a bunch of phone calls from the owner of this company at about 12:30, 12:45 in the morning. And I didn't answer the first few, but eventually I saw who it was and I answered. And I said, hey, what's going on? He said, Ed, we just had somebody rent our Lamborghini Huracan and they're driving as fast as they seem to be able to towards Atlanta, and we're worried that it's about to go away. I said, well, that's a valid concern. I think you should call the cops. They're like, Ed, we're not having any luck with the Audi, with the Atlanta cops. I don't know what we're gonna do. Can you please just go try to figure out where they're taking the car? Because they were probably 20 minutes out of Atlanta at that point. So as I left from the northern suburbs of Atlanta, I sent out a glimpse, a location service through an app to show them live where I was. And they had their updates every 30 seconds to maybe 2 or 3 minutes at a time, just depending on the granularity they were receiving from their tracking device, which I later found out was an OBD dongle that at any moment this guy could look down, see hanging there, and just throw out the window. And we'd have nothing that we could do to find the car. And so as I got down towards about Atlantic Station on 17th Street, I exited, and that's about where they were. And so I was probably 2 minutes behind them, but it was very hard for us to get to exactly the same point because they would just send me an update that we had an all new direction wherever the Lamborghini was going. So it kind of zigzagged around towards West Midtown and then up towards Buckhead, but then went over towards I-75 and was headed almost back north towards Tennessee. But around 285, they remarked as watching the satellite feed, it looked like they were trying to figure out in the Lamborghini if somebody was following them, because they went around some access road and some loops and cloverleafs around the interchange there, but then they went back north on 75. And so I was following them up 75, still a ways back, certainly not in visual range, but I knew we were fairly close. They're trying to direct me as to where to get off, and in fact, they missed the exit that I should have gotten off, and I went an exit further. So they went off on some side streets in the Lamborghini, and they said, all right, he stopped. And it looks like he went into kind of a building, let me give you the address. And they gave me the address, and it was next door to a body shop that I used to use a lot. And I don't know why I remember this body shop's address, but I did send a lot of cars there through the dealership and through the rental company. So I said, all right, I know exactly where that is. I come around, and probably 12 minutes or so after they'd pulled into this warehouse, I arrive. And there's lights on the 4th of July at 2:45 in the morning in this warehouse. And it's a wrap company. And it's got there's an Aston Martin Rapide outside and a Mustang and some pretty legitimate looking cars, but it's weird that there's people in there working. So I kind of pull back out on the street and I tell the guys, look, we're not talking about any amount of money that's going to compel me to knock on these guys' doors and interrupt these would-be car thieves right now. I said, now is the time when we know where the car is. You need to call the local police in Marietta and see what they'll do. And so a few minutes later, about 6 police cars very quietly with their lights off pulled down this street that no one else is using at this hour. And I'm parked a few driveways down, just kind of looking at the driveway to see what's happened. And they come up and I sort of explain the circumstance and they say, all right, well, this is not really a criminal matter. I said, I know that, but this is a circumstance where they're just about to lose a very expensive car based on what seems to be happening here. And I said, could you just kind of give me some kind of help in sort of figuring out exactly what's happening to the car right now? They're like, no, I mean, it's really not our thing. Obviously it's not illegal for somebody to drive a car from Tennessee to Georgia. We understand it's against some rental agreement or whatever the case may be, but that's a civil matter. That's not for us right now. Eventually, it can become a theft by conversion circumstance, but that's not really where we're at this moment. So we don't really have any jurisdiction or probable cause to do anything. And I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of weird that a Lamborghini just pulled in here and there's lights on in this shop in the middle of the night to work on a car that's not allowed to be worked on. I mean, I know it's not exactly a criminal circumstance, but can we at least just go see what's going on? So they kind of talked amongst themselves for a little while. And in the meantime, I'm getting calls from the owner of the rental company, the owner of the car, their lawyer, everyone saying, Ed, you just have to figure out some way. We can't lose this car. And I told him, I said, look, I get it. I know this is the worst nightmare you could ever imagine. And I'm not here to say I told you so, but this is a very difficult thing to proceed through because I don't even work for you. I don't have any legal grounds to repossess this car. And if they try to make things sticky, we're not going to have a whole lot of outs here. So I keep talking to the cops and they say, all right, let's just kind of drive around there. So we do, and their lights off, very quiet, and they kind of surround the building. So I get out, and one of the cops gets out, and we walk in there together. And as we walk in, it's like business as usual in this wrap shop. They've got a bunch of nice cars, a new R8 and an NSX, and a bunch of stuff they're in progress working on. And there's 5 or 6 employees there at 3 in the morning on the holiday, just working like it's 2 in the afternoon on a weekday. In the middle of the shop, there is a red Lamborghini Huracan, and there's this guy pulling wires out of it. He's got the dash out of the car, the whole front trunk liner's out. He's got all these tools out, and there's things laying out. I'm like, goodness gracious. And so I walk over there, and I'm like, what's going on here? And he said, this guy just sold the car, and he's looking for us to take the camera system out so he can put it in his next car. I said, well, this is actually a car he rented a few hours ago, and there's no authorization to do any work, and there's not a camera system in the car. He's definitely not allowed to do that, and we'd like you not to give him the car back. And he's like, look, I see all these cops. I'm not here to do anything wrong. If that's what the circumstance is, by all means. I'm not here to put up a fight, but I need to talk to this guy and just see what's going on. So he does a FaceTime call with the person who had dropped the car off, who was different than the female with a California driver's license who had rented the car just a few hours earlier in Tennessee. And he's like, oh yeah, man, we just went out to get some dinner at Waffle House and we'll be right there. And I certainly couldn't fault Waffle House as being the best choice of Atlanta cuisine at 3 in the morning on a holiday. But he said he was going to be back. He was calling an Uber or something like that. But he said, well, you just told me that you sold this car and you wanted me to remove that. And this guy's saying it's a rental car. He said, well, yeah. So I kind of took the phone from him. I said, hey, I'm with the rental company. We're going to be taking the car back right now. You're welcome to come back and we can discuss it. We've got the police here. Everything will be on the up and up, but we're not going to be taking things out of the car anymore, just so we're all clear. He's like, yeah, I'm on the way. Hangs up the phone. So I'm like, if you don't mind, I don't know what he was going to pay you for this job. I'll make sure that you're made whole beyond that, but just go ahead and let's try to put this thing back together, and then I'm going to end up taking it out of here. I'm going to park it in my warehouse, and then they can come pick it up in the next few days. So he gets it buttoned up, and the car starts, and this guy calls again. And I pick up his phone because he's been working, and he had no problem with that. And I'm like, look, I'm about to take this car back. Let's not worry about this anymore. You can take anything up that you have outstanding with the rental company. They'll be awaiting your call. And he's like, wait. My Uber just got canceled because my card got declined. Will you bring the Lamborghini and just come pick me up around the corner at the Waffle House? I said, yeah, you just order me around to Hash Browns and I'll be right around the corner. So obviously I did not go around the corner and pick this guy up at the local Waffle House. I'll just leave that to him and the owner of the rental company to sort out. But I was able to get the car home safe and sound to the VINwiki warehouse, and a couple days later they sent their guys down to pick it up. But I think we were really probably 15 or 20 minutes away from that car disappearing and never being seen again. And as you think about these types of businesses, all these interesting things that you can do with cars, a lot of times the risks just really do outweigh the potential reward that the industry has to offer. But fortunately in this circumstance, VINwiki was able to come to the rescue and save another stolen Lamborghini. But next time, I can't imagine we get that lucky. I need $5,000 to have it back. I said, you mean you want me to pay you for the return of my stolen property? He said, yep, that's the only way I can give it back to you. I had a customer who had rented my cars several times. In fact, he was an ex-Atlanta police officer. And he had rented the Gallardo a few times, so he wanted to rent that again. But in addition, he wanted to rent my Ferrari 612 Scaglietti so that his friend could have something to drive around while he was in town. And so about, I'd say it was on a Wednesday or Thursday, they picked up both cars and began paying for the rentals and gave us a credit card. We verified the insurance and went through all the normal steps. Over the next few days, they kept renewing the rentals, saying, we're having so much fun, we want to keep it. And I'm continuing to make a good deal of money renting the cars out, and I've got a, good customer in them, so I'm pleased with all that. But around Monday, I stopped hearing back from them. And I began telling them, well, it's time to either turn the cars back in or pay us for another day. And they wouldn't answer. And so I believe it was Tuesday night, I was out at my bachelor party because that Saturday I was getting married. And so we were out racing go-karts and having a good dinner, and I got a phone call, and it was peculiar. There was a woman on the other end of the phone, and she said, my husband is the guy who bought your Ferrari today, but we've decided we don't want it. In fact, we'd like the BMW we gave you and the $15,000 in cash as a down payment back, and we'd like to undo this whole deal. And I said, well, ma'am, literally every part of that sentence is a problem and fundamentally incorrect, because I didn't sell your husband my car, and whoever did was not authorized to do so. And she said, well, he's told us that he was one of your employees and that he worked for this rental car company. And I said, well, that's absolutely not the case. And she proceeded to tell me that, well, I'm a lawyer and possession is 9/10 of the law. I said, ma'am, it's a rental car, so possession is literally 0/10 of the law. And by saying that, I highly doubt you're actually a lawyer. But I'll need you to return to me this stolen property and understand that the police will very soon be going to find it. So she got upset, hung up the phone, and I had to return to try to enjoy what was left of my bachelor party before spending the next day and the next several days trying to work this all out. So I tried to contact the rental customer. Again, no answer. And I go on to track the cars. And I see that the Lamborghini is in a parking lot in Midtown. So I take the other key, go to Midtown, find that the car has had the front knocked off of it, and say, well, we found it at least. And so the next day I had a tow truck take it to my preferred body shop and begin the process of repairs, and we filed a claim with his insurance company. Still, he wouldn't answer the phone, and we could not find the Ferrari because the battery had gone dead, because like many of the Ferraris I've owned, the 612 was one of these cars that if you don't drive it every day or every 2 or 3 days, the battery will be dead next time you return to it. And so the tracking device was not functioning because the capacitance had worn out, and I had no idea where to find it. But I'd continued to have a little bit of luck getting in touch with this woman who was still not understanding that I didn't have her BMW or the money or access to the customer, but that she did absolutely have a car that was stolen. I came to find out that this is called theft by conversion, meaning that you had the privilege of use of this car, but that you converted it in a use that you were not permitted. So selling it was something that a rental customer was not allowed to do. So in converting it to an asset that they made for sale, that is the theft. Now the problem is, when you know who has your stolen property, the police don't do a very good job of trying to find out where it is. They seem to think that you'll go about finding it, or that it's not the same thing as throwing out an APB and having everybody find it, or at least everyone try. Because I had delivered the car in one county, and a few miles over in the next county is where the car was being used. And they were still occasionally driving it around, because I'd see the tracking device work and it would be at the valet lot of some restaurant or a mall or anything like that. But I could never get there in time to take my other key and repossess the car. So I had spoken to the police, and they said, well, yeah, we see it, but you've reported it stolen in your county and it's here, so we don't have a system that allows us to just understand every car that's stolen in the world. It seems like a market failure and something someone should explore, but they were very, very useless at the time. So I continue trying to express to this woman exactly the gravity of the situation for her, but she continues to be unwilling to return the car. So my groomsmen and I were all going around. We've got the rehearsal dinner coming up and everything's happening. And even as we led up to it, I still couldn't get in touch with the rental customer. But on Friday, literally the day before my wedding, I was finally able to talk to him, and I met him at a Waffle House, of all places. He, for some reason, had convinced himself that I might be pleased that he had sold this car, even though he had not specified a term of the loan, any interest terms, a selling price, or anything other than the fact that he had taken this guy's BMW, taken $15,000 in cash as a down payment, and agreed to some sort of payment schedule. Additional unfortunate news is that he didn't have a phone number, an address, an email address, or literally anything other than that the guy went by Lucky. So he was of very little use trying to get us the car back, even once he realized that he had made such a mistake. And so the police were starting to question him and trying to figure out things, but they weren't moving at all quickly. And I had my wedding the next day, and then I was leaving on my honeymoon the day after. And so the whole morning of our wedding, I'm constantly on the phone. We're trying to take photographs with the bridal party and everything like that. And I just can't. Literally, I cannot afford to have this go any way other than perfectly. And the reason for that is that the most difficult thing about setting up an exotic car rental company is managing the insurance. And trying to get an exotic car rental insurance policy is nearly impossible, and keeping it is also pretty much impossible, particularly if you ever file a claim. Because even though the insurance is legitimate and it's in place and it will pay out a claim, the accepted understanding on all parties is that if you file a claim, you will not be invited to renew the policy. And so while I could probably get the insurance company to pay for the theft, I would be invited not to renew, and so all the other car payments that I would need to make would not be possible because I would be out of business. So it was very much a rock and a hard place situation, and as you'd imagine, my new bride and her family and everybody else around the circumstance is pretty worried for me because they understand that this is a tremendous amount of money at risk, and all the cars are completely financed. It's not as though I own them and can just lose the money. It would be a long-term debt situation to try to recover in the event that things did not go so well. So we go through the wedding, and I'm wondering all the time, what do I do if my phone rings during the ceremony? Do I answer? I mean, certainly I can't afford not to, but that seems like a bad decision. And fortunately that didn't happen, or I suppose unfortunately, because the next morning I still had made no progress. I called my lawyer and I said, look, I've got to leave this in your hands. There's nothing else that I can do. But please, please, please have my car by the time I get back from this week-long honeymoon in St. Lucia. And so he says he's on it, and I'm literally texting with Lucky's wife, trying to express to her the significance of the situation and the importance that she return said stolen property as we're taking off from the airport. So somehow I did manage to enjoy our honeymoon without too much stress and anxiety, but it was certainly there in the background. And when I got back in touch with Lucky, finally. I convinced his wife to have Lucky call me. And Lucky said, I've still got your car. I understand sort of what's happened, but I need $5,000 to have it back. I said, you mean you want me to pay you for the return of my stolen property? He said, yep, that's the only way I can give it back to you. I said, well, let me see what I can do. So I called the police officers that were in charge of the case, and I explained to them what had happened. They said, well, do you want to pay $5,000? I was like, well, I mean, $5,000 at this moment, particularly at the prospect of everything else that I'm going to have to spend, is a little bit daunting. They said, well, ask if he'll take a check. I said, are you insinuating that I should stop payment on said check and therefore bounce a check to someone for $5,000? Because I believe that's a felony. They said, yeah, but don't worry about it. It's okay. It'll all be fine. I said, well, okay. So called him back. Lucky was happy to take a check. Lucky's got a bank account. So go to meet Lucky where he's told me the car is. And so we go to this parking lot in downtown Atlanta, and the car is obviously completely dead. So I've got to call a tow truck to come and get it. And because you really don't want to be jumping off a Ferrari ever, and certainly not in that circumstance where you know the battery's been drained and even the alternator's questionable. So I get the truck headed that way, and you know, at the time, Lucky and I are talking. He's hanging out. He has a friend actually drive up in this seafoam green, atrocious Maserati Quattroporte, and the paint, which had obviously been a repaint, was falling off in chunks, and so he was asking me for advice on what body shop he might use. So I made a great recommendation to him. I don't know if he ever took me up on it. Then we parted ways. I followed the tow truck home. Lucky went away with the check. So as I'm headed home, predictably, I get a phone call from the bank. They say, hey, we've got this check, and it looks a little bit suspicious, and the guy looks a little bit suspicious, and so we just really want to know what's going on. I said, yes, that's an extortion payment for the return of stolen property. Please don't honor it. There should be a stop payment in your system. Oh, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Bolian. I hope you have a great day. Well, it hadn't started out that way, but it is what it is. So we make it back to my warehouse and go on about trying to get the car charged back up and evaluating the state of things. And fortunately, it was in pretty good condition, a little curb damage on a wheel and a scratch in the clear bra, but nothing to be too terribly concerned about. But a few minutes later, Lucky shows up. His wife, I guess, had found our address, and even though we generally delivered cars to customers and didn't have a whole lot of customers here, he came to the warehouse to express his displeasure with the fact that he had not received his $5,000. I explained to him that's a felony. What you've done is extort payment for the return of stolen property, and I'm not interested in participating in that. What'll be best is if we part ways and never speak of this again. I've never seen or heard from Lucky or that customer since then. But it was definitely a very, very dramatic week in my life where the Ferrari got stolen and the Lamborghini got crashed.
And the car, in true Ferrari form, went up in flames. Probably all of us have heard about the fantastic story of the Ferrari F50 getting jacked on a test drive from Algar Ferrari and then being hidden in plain sight in Kentucky via a VIN swap and finally getting apprehended by the FBI and being wrecked by a careless FBI agent. So of course that's one of the fantastic stories, but we know that scams happen on a regular daily basis, and if we do any searching on Craigslist or eBay, we come across them ourselves. Of course, there's always the fake cashier's check warnings and the people who want to send you too much money and then you refund them for the shipping and things like that, or people that want them to send you a $500 deposit for a deal that's too good to be true. But I've got a collection of a number of pretty incredible stories that will make you probably never want to get into the car business, or at least never try to buy a car from somebody you don't know again. I believe this was actually my first client when I opened up Switch Cars after I left the Land Rover dealer, and he had hired me to find him a Range Rover. So we were looking around for pre-owned ones that were a decent deal but a good car, and he was also looking, and he found this one on eBay. An aggressive deal, but not too good to be true. If retail was about 57 to 60,000 at the time, I think this one was 55 grand, buy it now. And he had great pictures and VIN number, and he had a phone number where you could actually call and talk to him. And he wasn't speaking in broken English, could actually put sentences together in his email responses. Everything seemed to be legitimate. The only somewhat red flag was that the car was in a warehouse in Texas and he was in Buffalo, New York, which isn't an immediate scam because, I mean, I've sold cars that are not in the same location that I am, but it's certainly something to be cautious of. So my customer was ready to send this guy money, and I noticed something was off, and I called up my customer right away and I said, Mike, we got a problem. I said, if you look at the nav screen, that is from a 2004 because it's got the twisty buttons, and he was advertising it as a 2005, which has the touchscreen navigation. I said, that's not the right car. So I started doing a little more digging through his eBay profile, and he had hundreds of positive feedback. So I went into the accounts that had left him feedback, and I realized that all of their feedback for transactions were for penny transactions, recipes, and things like that. And I started digging some more and realized that all of the ones below that were the same thing, and they were basically just leaving each other feedback. So this guy had created hundreds, maybe thousands of eBay accounts to build up this large network of transactions and feedback to make himself look trustworthy. This guy went to the Rob Pitt School of eBay manipulation. And I contacted the FBI and let them know about this, but they were busy and didn't get back to me. But somebody, I think I may have posted the details online as well to warn people, and somebody contacted me a few weeks later and said, hey, we know you know about this guy, but I sent him a cashier's check and I'm out $55,000 and he's disappeared. What can you do for me? And I'm like, nothing. Like, call the FBI. Sorry. I mean, he's probably overseas by now, but next time call me first, because I probably would have saved you the money. There was a gentleman in Ohio who had a penchant for buying black exotic cars with money that was not real. And he knew how to play the part. He was very personable. He had fancy watches, dressed well, and actually had some money and knew how to talk the game. So he would go into dealers and request a test drive. He would even negotiate, and he would buy a car. And he got a Mercedes dealer with a SL and wrote them a check that was not good. And you would think, okay, well, why would somebody do this? And he really just did it for the fun of it. He lived locally and had a local driver's license, would purport that he was an attorney. And so, of course, you know, a dealer would take a personal check from a local guy who lived in an affluent neighborhood who was an attorney. Why wouldn't you? You can always send the sheriff if the check isn't good. And of course, attorneys have greater consequences if they write checks which are not good. But of course, he was not a real attorney, and the checks were written on an account that was not real. He ended up walking into another local dealer who is a friendly competitor of mine and bought a black Ferrari 430 Spider. Proceeded to wreck it that night, unbeknownst to the dealer. He took it out and got high and drunk and T-boned somebody at an intersection, and the car, in true Ferrari form, went up in flames. So of course it got posted on Wrecked Exotics and stuff like that later on, but the dealer had no idea at the time. But they got a call from their bank the next day, which was a Saturday, that said, hey, there's something funny going on with this check. So he contacted them Monday when they had called him frantically saying, hey, this check is no good, and apologized profusely and said, I'm sorry, there was some error, and said, I'll wire you the money today. And oh, by the way, I'd like to buy the Ferrari California you have as well for my brother. And would you deliver it to the Justice Center downtown? Irony of all ironies. And they called the local police and said, hey, we have to deliver this other car. You want to set up a sting operation. So that's what they did. The cops followed them down. They parked outside the Justice Center with a Ferrari, and as soon as he got in the car, the cops swarmed and arrested him. My landlord at the time is a Hudson police officer, and she called me a few days later and said, hey, just want to let you know, sorry I didn't call you sooner, but we had this guy in prison and he recently got out. We put him away last time for buying black exotic cars with fake checks, and he recently got released, so just wanted to let you know because we know you sell exotic cars. I said, well, thankfully he didn't get me, but you're a few days too late because he just got one of my buddies. a client contacted me looking to sell their 996 Porsche GT3, and they had it on consignment at a local dealer, Go Motors, out of Boulder, Colorado. The dealer would consign any car for a $1,000 commission, which I thought was a little bit odd. You know, maybe if you're doing lower end Audis, which they did, that would be acceptable. But for a GT3, I just said, hey, listen, you can't survive making $1,000 on these types of cars. I did some more digging on this Go Motors, and I found a lot of negative feedback kind of covered up under their positive reviews. Nothing scammy, just these guys aren't the most up and up guys. The gut check gave me indigestion. So I called the customer and said, listen, I'd prefer to just buy the car from you directly and cut out this dealer. Why don't you go get the car and the title from him, and I'll just tell him the deal's off. So he did, and I ended up wiring money to the customer directly, which one would think is the less safe way to do things. I'm wiring money to some individual who I don't know, with whom I have no recourse. But it turns out that was the best course of action. Maybe a month later, it came out that the owner of Go Motors was indicted for fraud. He was selling cars on consignment, taking the money, and not paying the consigners. And unfortunately, the consigners are always out the money because they have really no recourse through the courts with these companies who file bankruptcy, and the money's gone overseas already. And even if they get a court injunction to seize the car, case law states that the person who bought the car bought it on good faith, and the law typically protects the person who bought the car and the consignment dealership. I wouldn't have gotten screwed on that because I would have received the title in the car, but I saved my customer from being out the money. And of course, he was very grateful, and we've done business since then as well. And I think I've sold that GT3 a couple more times since then. So then, of course, there's always the overseas buyers who like sending fake checks. And usually I don't entertain these guys, but I figured I'd have fun with one of them. And he had emailed me about a Diablo SV and some other car and asked me what my best price was. And a couple months later, he got back to me saying he wanted to buy the car. And I think both of them were sold at that point, but I'm gonna mess with him. He's a scammer, so why not? So I tell him to FedEx me a check. And he does, from Nigeria or somewhere over there. But it was a check drawn on a US account from a company in Wisconsin. And I looked up the company. They're a large industrial company. I looked at the signatures on the check, and they were printed, which is legitimate. Some companies will not sign their checks actually, but I'm like, I knew it was a scam, so I was just having fun with him at this point. So I called up the company in Wisconsin, and I deciphered the name that was one of the signatures, and I asked for that person. And turns out they actually worked there. They were the controller at the company. And I said, hey, just so you know, somebody over in Africa is writing checks on your company's behalf to buy some cars. And I'm sure you may be aware of this or may not be, but I want to let you know. So I messed with him a little more and said, hey, the check is for the wrong amount, please send me another one. And just want to see how much money I could make him spend on international overnight packages. But he probably wasn't paying those bills either. But in spite of all my caution and experience, I did get scammed once. And I guess I'm not ashamed to admit it because it was a pretty good scam. It was back when the Nissan GTRs were still being pre-ordered. And of course, I had a number of them at sticker price, which I then sold for a hefty profit. This guy contacted me out of the blue and said, I have an allocation that I want to, move on, and it's at sticker, and I just need you to reimburse me for my deposit amount. Now you might say, well, why would somebody give up an allocation at sticker? As did I, but that actually happens. So this one seemed legitimate. He faxed me the contract that he had with the dealer and the order spec and confirmation of order, and everything checked out. His only request was, hey, please don't call the dealer because I don't want to, get in hot water and have them pull the allocation because they know I'm flipping it, which was a legitimate request. I mean, when I was flipping Porsches, I obviously didn't want the customers calling up the dealer saying, hey, I just bought your allocation for 50 grand over sticker from Doug, because that would have immediately annoyed them and they would have found reason to pull the allocation other than the reasons they did anyway. I sent him the $5,000 and checked in with him every few weeks. And the only red flag I got was he seemed to not really remember who I was when I called. But I just chalked that up to scatterbrained or whatever. And, you know, I'd sent him the money, so what could I do at this point but just to keep checking in? And I was on the golf course having a somewhat enjoyable day, and I got a call from a attorney general or some sort of detective or something like that in Iowa and said, hey, did you send him some money? I said, yes. Let me guess. I'm not getting it back. And he said that was the case, and I was pretty bummed. It definitely ruined a nice day on the golf course. And I also thought later that it would be an even better scam if the detective who called me wasn't a real detective, but he was somebody hired by this guy to call everybody so that they would feel at ease that, oh, well, it's being investigated and there's nothing else I can do, and therefore not take any legal action.
He said, well, that sounds like it's probably a stolen car. So for 6 years, I was the director of sales for Lamborghini Atlanta, and during that time I sold a few hundred Lamborghinis, many of which stayed local. And I think when I started one year, we checked and there were 93 Lamborghinis registered in Georgia. I certainly increased that during the time that I worked there, and we had others that were registered in Montana and elsewhere. But over time, I became pretty familiar with just about all the Lamborghinis that were in town. And so not long after we launched VINwiki last summer, probably sometime in July, I was driving home from the office and I looked in the parking lot of the Target near my house and I saw an orange 2008 Superleggera. And I didn't think there were any orange 08 Superleggeras registered in town, and I was going to post the car to VINwiki like a lot of exotic car spotters do. So I drove down into the parking lot. And it was sprinkling rain, so I snapped some pictures through my window, but then I noticed that the car had a dealer tag on it. A reasonable explanation why it had shown up, and I didn't know anything about it, but it meant that our plate to VIN system wouldn't decode the VIN from the license plate. So I decided, well, I'll get out and I'll actually get it off the car. So as I walked up to the car, it was fascinating. It was a normal option Superleggera, but it had ceramic brakes, which were about a $15,000 option back in 2008. It was a Rancio Borealis, the pearl orange color. It had the large rear wing, the extended interior carbon package, the backup camera, and presumably navigation. Those four options were pretty much universal to Superleggeras. But when I looked at the VIN, there was something peculiar about it, and it was printed in the wrong font. Now, most people wouldn't know the font that Lamborghini prints their VINs in, but I did, and I knew it was wrong. So that was a little bit strange, and when I typed it into VINwiki, it didn't immediately validate the VIN. So in the US, VINs use a check digit. So the vehicle identification number, just like a credit card number, has a check digit that you can run an algorithm through, and it'll immediately tell you if it's a valid VIN. Now that doesn't work in some parts of Europe and in other parts of the world, but in the US it does. It's a law that cars sold in the US have to have a mathematically validating VIN. So that didn't validate, but I snapped a few pictures, walked around, and got back in my car and went home. But the next day when I was looking back through the pictures trying to figure out what was wrong, I noticed why the VIN wasn't validating. In fact, it was only 16 digits. So in the US, a Gallardo Superleggera VIN for 2008 would start ZHW like any Lamborghini VIN, G for Gallardo, U for the US, 43 is for Gallardo Superleggera Coupe, T for an E-gear transmission, then it'll have a check digit, then it'll have an 8 for model year 2008, then it'll say LA0, and then it'll have 4 digits that are the build number. And so in this car's case, the U wasn't there, so there was no country identifying character, and that's why the VIN wasn't validating through our system. So I thought that was pretty peculiar, so I called a friend of mine who's the chief of police in a local town and told him about it. And he said, well, that sounds like it's probably a stolen car. I said, well, that's fascinating. Let's see what we can find out. He said, let me ask around through the auto theft unit, see if anybody's looking for the car, and we'll have somebody get back in touch with you. So I thought we were onto something interesting, and I wanted to keep digging through. And it turned out that A couple other people had already spotted that same car around Atlanta, and so we were able to sort of compile the history of when it had come in on a truck and what parts of town it had been seen driving in. And with VINwiki, one of the interesting things you can do is build a list of cars. So you can add all the examples of a certain car, like 2008 Superleggeras in the US. And one VINwiki user who aspires to one day own one of these cars had gone through and done just that. So pretty much all the US Superleggeras were in VINwiki already. And we could browse through and see which ones made sense, which ones didn't have ceramic brakes, which ones were orange, because in 2008, they didn't allow any ad personam orders. They were all standard range colors. They were either white, black, gray, orange, or yellow, obviously in their Italian names. So we ruled out all the cars that weren't orange. We ruled out cars with cosmetic modifications, and we ruled out cars that had been exported, and we ruled out cars that didn't have ceramic brakes. And we got down to about 25 cars that this one could be, assuming that its VIN was wrong. And we knew that even the suffix, the build number of the VIN was wrong because it wasn't in the range of Superleggera VINs. So after that, we went through and I ran the Carfaxes and looked across all the information that I could gather on each one. And we found out that only one of these cars had ever been reported stolen. And it was VIN, I think, 6668. A few days later, I got a call from an officer with the Department of Revenue, and they had been looking into this car, and I told them that we had done some digging and we thought that the car was probably 6668. And he said, yeah, we think that too, but we were a little surprised that you were able to figure that out. I said, yeah, and I told him how we'd done it and stuff like that. And he said he didn't really know much about it, but it wasn't stolen, strictly speaking, but it was probably misrepresented to an insurance company. Not a wildly uncommon thing, particularly back in 2008 and 2009, because at the time these cars were just depreciating catastrophically. And prior to that, banks had been financing way over sticker. So it was not uncommon for the owner of one of these cars to be $150,000 upside down in equity. So it was a hard thing for them to get rid of, and the most convenient solution, it seemed at times, was just to call their insurance and say it had been stolen and collect on their insurance and potentially gap coverage as well. So he didn't have a whole lot more. He said they were going to continue looking for it, but that wasn't really good enough for me. I wanted to find out more about the car. So I went down to our local tag office and I said that I had found this car with a dealer tag on it that I wanted to buy. Not untrue. I'm always interested in buying a cheap Gallardo. And so I gave her the dealer tag number and I asked if she would just give me the dealer's name so that I could contact them and see, because obviously the car wasn't listed for sale online or anything like that. And she was very reluctant, but I convinced her to let me know what the name of the dealership was, and I found out that it wasn't terribly far from where I live. So I drove by the place where it was and walked up and knocked on the door. And I said, hey, do you guys have an orange Superleggera for sale? And the guy who owned the place wasn't there, but there was a guy subletting some part of the building for detailing. And he said, oh yeah, it's right back here. Do you want to come and take a look at it? And I said, absolutely. So I walked back there and got to have a little bit more of a look around the car, and the guy didn't care. He was happy to let somebody look. He assumed the car was for sale because he knew that it was in the building owned by a dealership. But next to the car was another 2008 Gallardo. It was a Spider. And so we were looking around both. I opened the car. It had about 39,000 miles, which I think it had been stolen with under 5,000 or under 3,000 miles when it left California. And so someone had put a lot of miles on the car. It had cheap tires and some little scuffs around the carbon diffusers and things like that. It wasn't in great shape, but it was definitely a cool orange 08 Superleggera. So I looked on the door jamb where there's the VIN sticker with all the manufacturer data on it, and it had also been altered. You could kind of see where someone had gone in and changed it, but on that one they had put the U. So it was 17 digits and wouldn't mathematically validate because the check digit was wrong, but it was a full 17-digit Lamborghini looking VIN that was probably passable to all but maybe me. I can't imagine anybody else in the state would have ever taken the time to look or have any amount of knowledge to be able to say that it didn't make sense for the car to be as it was. But I get to looking around the car and I knew there's no real other place for me to find the car's real VIN without getting it up on a lift and looking at the frame rail. But I look in the glove box and the owner's manuals are there. And whenever we got a new Lamborghini from the factory, we would take out the owner's manual and there's a warranty and maintenance book. And on it, there's boxes, 17 of them, to write in each character of the VIN. And whoever had gotten this car or purchased it as a stolen car and was using it hadn't bothered to throw that away. So I opened it up and looked, and lo and behold, that's exactly which car it was, the one we thought, the one the Department of Revenue thought it was. And so I took a picture and told the guy, hey, you know, have the owner call me. I'd love to talk to him about buying the car, stuff like that. Obviously, I never heard from him, but I followed back up with the Department of Revenue and gave them the information that they had, and also told them about the other car, which had an identically replicated VIN. And someone had really gone through some trouble here. You'd have to have removed the windshields to install the new VIN plates. But they were thrilled with this silver platter case of auto theft and to discover. And I guess they didn't have to worry about, you know, trying to corroborate any of the other information because it was all presented to them nicely packaged. So I talked to another friend on the police force that was in that area, because it was a different area than the chief of police that I knew, and he said that they were going to go in and get them. And so I tried to talk to them a few days later, and they were obviously hugely grateful that VINwiki had been such a help collectively to figure out what the plight was of these cars. And I asked him, you know, did the guy tell you like how he came about them or what he had found or whatever the case may be? Because over the years, I mean, I'll be honest, I've been offered to buy some stolen cars, stolen exotics, and they don't tend to bring much money because there's not that much you can do with them. I remember I got offered a stolen 03 360 Spider. It was when they were worth probably 130 grand. And he said it was in South Georgia, wrapped in aluminum foil, because he wasn't sure if there was a tracking device that might have been telling the people where to come and find it. And it was exactly the same case as this, where he had been upside down, couldn't sell the car, and rather than getting it repoed, he just reported it stolen, got it paid off, and then hid the car. He said, you know, you can have it for 25 grand, but you have to go and pick it up. And so obviously I was not interested in doing that. But, you know, for plenty of people that might want to track car or to export something or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of fun to be had for 25 grand. And that was certainly what had happened here. But the guy who'd had the car for so long was in trouble for a lot more. So in fact, I don't even believe he was prosecuted for grand theft auto, because the cops said that when they got there were all these illegal drugs and weapons and other things like hidden in the walls of this car dealership lot unit, whatever the case may be. And so they didn't really bother too much with the Lamborghinis, but I was curious who I could try to buy these things from, because theoretically they were going to be owned by insurance companies. So I called Lamborghini Newport Beach and I asked them to run the actual VIN and to see who the titled owner was. And they told me that it was titled to Manhattan Leasing, and that the second lien holder was All Points Capital. All Points Capital is one of these banks that does secondary lending through different leasing companies like Manhattan Leasing. They'll do balloon loans with 35 to 55% residual and a 60 or 48 month term. And so I was familiar with them. If we had someone with not quite good enough credit to go with any of the other banks, we'd sometimes call Manhattan. So I called them up and I talked to the president and I said, hey, are y'all missing an orange 2008 Superleggera? He said, you know, we're missing a few cars, let me check. He said, yep, that one's mine. And so I explained to him the circumstance, said I'd found it, and he was extremely grateful, he seemed, and told me that, you know, he'd send me a $5,000 check for finding the car, which I was thrilled with. Unfortunately, he never did that. I never heard another word from him, and after following up, he seems to have decided that it wasn't worth that to return his car. But it was a cool experience. It was a demonstration of the power of VINwiki, the way we can crowdsource information to achieve an outcome that other platforms, other sources of information never could. The cops were grateful. They've asked us to find other stolen cars, and we've made progress to that since then. But it was a great experience, a great time, and a fun little chase.